Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back once again. And today we will be talking about another letter that comes from the makhraj of al-lisan, the tongue, and that letter is al-dad. So bismillah, let's start. From this video, we want to take away 4 main points in terms of learning outcomes. The first point is understanding the makhraj of dad. The second main point is to understand the part of the tongue that has to do with the makhraj of dad, specifically hafat al-lisan, which is the edge of the tongue. The third point we want to talk about is where do we actually apply the pressure when we pronounce the letter dad, and where do we just contact. And the fourth point is to understand some common errors and go through them. So bismillah, let's go ahead. Let's first say and put it on the table and mention that the dad is actually one of the most difficult letters, if not the most difficult letter in Arabic. And that's for both Arabic speakers or non-Arabic speakers. But today, inshallah, we'll dissect the makhraj, we'll understand it more, and by the end of it, inshallah, we'll be able to conquer the makhraj of dad. Let's start by looking at some images and talking about the lisan. So let's revise quickly before we go there. We talked about the different areas of the lisan. We talked about the furthest area and the middle area. And for the dad, what we'll talk about is the edge of the lisan. So if you look at the lisan, that's looking from the top. If this is the back of the furthest point of the lisan, the middle of the lisan, and the tip. When we talk about dad, we're talking about the edge, hafat al-lisan, hafa, so the edge of the lisan, that edge there, that's what we're going to go about in detail. And to simplify it, there's 2 main parts. There's a part here, which is kind of the sides, the edge of the lisan there, and then there's the front part of the edge. Let's go to some of the images and go through it in detail. So here's the picture of the lisan that we saw in the previous videos. And if we wanted to describe the edge, again, we're talking about all this area. So that area is the edge of the lisan. And if we wanted to define it further, we can say that, there's on the side part, so on there, the very tip of it, we can call that the furthest part of the edge. We can call that the furthest part of the edge. Now again, why do we call it furthest, or furthest from where? That's the furthest from the lips. Then if we go up, that point there is the nearest part. That's the nearest part of the edge. And then if you keep following there to the top, that part there, we can call it the end of the edge or the tip of the edge of the lisan. So that's the furthest part of the edge, the nearest part of the edge, and the end of the edge. Now that blue part, you see that blue highlighted part of the lisan has a lot to do with the makhraj of dad, as we'll describe in a second. Okay, so here's that tongue again. That's the back of the tongue, and that's the tip of the tongue. And we're talking about the edge here, that's edge on the sides and the edge at the front. So the makhraj of dad is from that edge, so the edge of the lisan with what is opposite to it from the molars. And it can be from this edge or that edge or both edges. So in other words, that blue part that you saw in the picture, the blue edge is pushing against the upper palate right next to where the molars are. On one side, on the right side, or the left side, or both. And the rest of the edge, the part that was highlighted in yellow, is touching, but it's not pushing. So again, the edge of the lisan, from the furthest point to the nearest point, is pushing against the upper palate right next to the molars. On either side, either one of them or both of them, and the remaining of the edge is touching the upper palate, but not pushing against it, so just barely contact. Here it is in a picture format. So that blue area there I'm pointing to now, that's the area we talked about, the area that we cause pressure, or that presses against the upper palate right next to the upper molars, either the right side or the left side or both of them together. And then the area of contact, that front edge there, contacts the upper palate, but it's just merely a contact. You don't actually apply the pressure. So the concentration of the pressure is next to the molars. That is the key with getting the makhraj of Dad correct. And when we explain some of the common errors, part of it will be because that the makhraj of Dad isn't correct in terms of where we actually put the pressure for the Dad. So once again, the makhraj of Dad is from the edge of the tongue. And the edge is pressing against what lies opposite to it from the upper molars, either side. And there's an area where we apply pressure, and there's an area we use contact. Now, let's go to the fourth point, the fourth takeaway from this video, and about the common mistakes when it comes to Dad. The first common mistake that can happen with the makhraj of Dad, or the pronunciation of Dad, is to pronounce a qalqala with the Dad, which is incorrect. So, for example, to say وَقَضُبَ, that's incorrect. وَقَضُ is incorrect. We have to say وَقَضَّ. And the second common mistake with the makhraj of Dad is to pronounce it like a dal, which is thick. So a mistake would be to say وَلَدَّ versus وَلَدَّالِّينَ. That's the correct pronunciation, but if we say وَلَدَّ, that's incorrect. That's just a dal, which is thick. Now, to understand what the mechanism, what's happening there with regards to how we describe, if we said da, say da, or try to say da, what you'll find is that the tip of the tongue is touching, but the edge of the tongue, that edge we were talking about, is not actually touching against the molars. So when you say da, that edge is not touching. Hence the makhraj itself is not correct. And the third common mistake with the makhraj of Dad, or the pronunciation of Dad, is to cut the sound completely. So to say walad, 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 while the correct Dad, the sound flows. Walad, walad, not walad, walad. Another mistake with pronouncing the Dad is pronouncing it as a dha. And that, for example, is in the word وَلَضَّالِّينَ. You'll hear someone might say وَلَضَّالِّينَ, وَلَضَّا, and that's incorrect. Now the reason that happens is it's a completely incorrect makhraj. So the tongue is in a completely incorrect location, as in it's touching the tip of the front teeth if you say dha. But that's not the case with the Dad. The tongue should not be touching the tip of the front teeth. So there's no doubt it's a very difficult letter, but insha'Allah with practice we can get any difficult letter correct bi'idhnillah. So let's recap, summarize, and revisit those learning objectives that we started with. We wanted to understand the makhraj of Dad. And we said that the makhraj of Dad is from the edge of the lisan with what lies opposite to it from the upper molars, either side or both sides. And we wanted to understand what the edge of the lisan is, and we described that in detail. And we wanted to understand where we apply pressure to get the correct makhraj of Dad, and we said that the edge next to the molars is where you apply the pressure, and the edge at the front is where you just touch or contact without pressure. And then we talked about some of the common mistakes with the makhraj of Dad, one of them being making a qalqal on the Dad, one of them being saying da, a thick dal, which is an incorrect makhraj, and one of them is cutting in the sound. Insha'Allah, as we said, with practice we can get the Dad, and we'll see you in the next video. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.